Hi people, thanks for coming to my channel. So there's a number of things I want to cover in this video, so bear with me. Might be a bit longer, but like I say, it's I think important to cover all the content I want to. There's a bit of crossover here. Um, the subject matter would honestly take a lot more than one video, and I just intend to focus on a few things. Um, People are welcome to expand this in the comment section. And do it that way. But I'm just going to focus on a few things. So I was browsing my timeline on Facebook and I came across a famous photograph. And the photograph is from the funeral of King Edward VII in 1910. It's quite a famous photo. It shows a lot of European heads of state, monarchs, standing from left to right. Hakon VII of Norway, Ferdinand of Bulgaria, Manuel II of Portugal, Wilhelm II of Germany, George I of Greece, and Albert I of Belgium, seated, Alfonso the 13th of Spain, George V of the United Kingdom, and Frederick the 8th of Denmark. It's quite a famous photo, and it might be the single picture with the most serving monarchs in one picture. So it's quite famous. But anyway, the caption was from a source called Zambian History and Picture. Block capital, stop blaming Queen Elizabeth II. Stop blaming Queen Elizabeth II for the ills of colonization. She just found out what these monarchs had put in place, but she did her level best for the independence of African countries under her monarchy. But this coming from an African source, but they go on to say these are the beasts of colonization, blaming these kings. Um, so, what I don't intend to do here is a big, long, comprehensive analysis of the British Empire. Like I say, that's impossible in one video. There's simply too many angles to look at, so I'm not even going to attempt it. But on the issue of Zambia, um, it reminded me of something I read in this book, Empire by Neil Ferguson, which is a very well written book. And despite what critics say, it's not just an apology for empire. He doesn't gloss over the negative side, which as critics have claimed, that's not the case at all. Rather, he just points out that it's not quite as black and white as is sometimes implied. Now, I'm going to read out a section, page 368. This is quite important, and it refers to Zambia. But by the way, I actually have a Zambian kwacha note. I don't know where it came from. I've never been to Zambia, and I've never directly met a Zambian, so I don't know where that note came from. But it's one of my favorite notes. I collect money from around the world. It shows a slave breaking his chains, and it's Kwame Nkrumah. Excuse me, not Kwame Nkrumah, Kenneth Kaunda, the late Kenneth Kaunda on the back. It's one of my favorite notes, actually. I collect money from around the world. Anyway, for all these reasons, the notion that British imperialism tended to impoverish colonized countries seems inherently problematic. That's not to say that many former colonies are not exceedingly poor. Today, for example, per capita GDP in Britain is roughly 28 times what it is in Zambia. This was published in 2003. I'll read that again. Today, for example, per capita GDP in Britain is roughly 28 times what it is in Zambia, which means that the average Zambian has to live on something less than $2 a day. But to blame this on the legacy of colonism, colonialism, is not very persuasive when the differential between British and Zambian incomes was so much less at the end of the colonial period. In 1955, British per capita GDP was just 7 times greater than the Zambian. It has been since independence that the gap between the colonizer and the ex-colony has become gulf. The same is true of nearly all former colonies in sub-Saharan Africa, with the notable exception of Botswana. In other words, the gap has grown since independence. For whatever reason, it's growing. Um, Kenneth Kaunda was a respected leader, I think it's fair to say. He didn't make some of the mistakes that some of the other post-colonial leaders did. Certainly, the despotic regime of Robert Mugabe, the squandered regime of Robert Mugabe. But the fact is, that the Zambian economy has actually, the gap has got bigger. Now, it's not that the British economy has got bigger, we've lost an empire. So how can this be explained? Certainly, it can't all be blamed on colonialism. Thing about the exception with being Botswana brought to my mind a film I watched the other night. I've seen it before, A United Kingdom with Rosamund Pike and David Oyelowo. And it's a true story of a controversial mixed race couple in the late 40s, early 50s, who received hostility from both sides. Um, Seretse Khama, he was the king of what was then Bechuanaland, where he was the heir to that royal lineage. And he struggled for independence, but he also recognized that they had to do it differently. It had to be different from apartheid South Africa. Now, it's a very good film. It shows the hostility they got from the British colonial forces and, let's face it, racist attitudes of that time. But also hostility within Bechuanaland, hostility towards Ruth Kama, who was a white woman. She's basically a typist from London, but they made history, and it's a good movie. I recommend it. It's called A United Kingdom. I may be biased because I like both actors, but it's a good movie. But anyway, that situation with Botswana may be because of his leadership. He was a good president. He was definitely one of the exemplary post-colonial African leaders, and there hasn't been a great deal of them. It has to be said. Far too many despots and selfish dictators who squandered that independence. Bakama was one of the exceptions. Um, Now, on the subject of colonialism, I want to look at a new film that's coming out. Apparently, it's called The Woman King, and again, I came across this in a post the other day. Actually, it might be an interesting film. It's not a subject that we often see, which is set in African history. We don't actually see that many films set in Africa during the colonial period. Although actually this was 1820, so it might actually be slightly before. Now, I haven't looked at the background extensively, um, but basically it's really bigging up this film as being representative of a black feminist voice. It's about a woman who led her armies in the Kingdom of Dahomey. Kingdom of Dahomey is in present-day Benin. It's the southern coast of part of West Africa, and it was quite a strong kingdom for 4 centuries, from about 1600 to 1904, when I believe it was annexed into the British Empire. Um, I may be getting my history wrong. It may have been earlier than that. But anyway, um, someone said, "What about the slavery in the Dahomey Kingdom?" So I thought, is this true? So I decided to check out the article on this, and this is from the Wikipedia article. So I'm just going to read this out. Two major changes occurred in the 1840s and 1850s, which significantly altered politics in Dahomey. The first one consisted of diplomatic pressure by the British government on the Kingdom of Dahomey to abolish the slave trade in the early 19th century. This was pressure from the British government on the Dahomey government to abolish slavery. This was the British pushing for the abolition of slavery in an African kingdom. This coincided with a period of British colonial expansion in the region, and while Britain dispatched numerous diplomatic parties to Gezo was the king, to try and convince him to end Dahomey's participation in the slave trade, all of these were rebuffed, with Gezo worried of the political consequences of ending such trade. Secondly, the city of Abeokuta was founded in 1825 and rose to prominence as a safe haven for people to be safe from the slave raids by Dahomey. In 1844, Dahomey and Abeokuta went to war, and Abeokuta was victorious. Other violence in the early 1850s further cemented Abeokuta's challenge to Dahomey's economic control in the region. Now, The Woman King is set a bit earlier, it's set in the 1820s, but the point is that was a time when clearly slavery was being used as one of the main methods of that kingdom. And as she was its queen at the time, she was unquestionably complicit in this. So, what we have here is a film that's being released. It's supposed to be all about a black identity and black feminist identity. My question is, are they going to exonerate this? Are they going to ignore the fact that her kingdom used slaves? And this is one of the biggest problems I find with debates around the British Empire today. it's so one-sided. I mean, the political left, all they want to do is utterly vilify British hegemony. All they want to do is utterly look at the negative side. They ignore the fact that when the slave trade was abolished in 1807 in the British Empire, excuse me, in the United Kingdom, we spent something like 40% of our national budget doing that. 40%, that's a staggering amount. A staggering amount. You wouldn't find a single department today that would be spending that much. And then, of course, it was abolished across the empire in 1833. The fact of the matter is, for most of the 19th century, the Royal Navy actually, I forget the name of the particular unit, but there was actually a specific fleet, a specific convoy involved in anti-slavery operations throughout the 19th century. We were the superpower of the day, and we basically patrolled the world oceans, intercepting slavery ships across the empire. Now, these are the facts. So when I see people saying, "Oh, the evil British need to pay reparations for slavery," I would argue we already did. Firstly, by abolishing it and spending a hefty portion of our economy on doing so, but also Royal Navy sailors, risked their lives in those anti-slavery operations. Not to mention the millions, if not billions, we've given in foreign aid over the years. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't. I don't agree with those some on the right who said we just cut off all foreign aid. I don't agree with that. But I do think we should be perhaps more meticulous in knowing where that goes and to see it's not squandered on corruption. Um, I'm sick and tired of the political left and some Pan Africanists just vilifying this country and everything in it. And as for Queen Elizabeth II, I suppose some would argue she and now Charles III inherited the lineage that those earlier monarchs did benefit from the empire. But put it this way, if if the legacy of colonialism is so awful, wouldn't all those Commonwealth countries have voluntarily left the Commonwealth? They weren't in the Commonwealth by coercion or force. It was entirely a matter of choice. And it's true, at the start of her reign, she was head of state of more countries. So throughout her reign, there were more republics declared. That's true. But the fact is, in fact, the Commonwealth has slightly grown. Gabon has just joined the Commonwealth. Gabon was a French colony. What does this say about the Commonwealth? Um, and the fact of the matter is, whatever way you gloss it over, the United Kingdom is the mother nation of the Commonwealth. Without the British Empire, there's no Commonwealth. That's a fact. And it's kind of taboo to say that now because, oh, well, we can't associate with the Empire. But really, the Commonwealth is the former British Empire. But the difference is, this isn't sort of diktat from London or from colonial governors. This is by choice. And, I think it's a testament to the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II that even avowed Republicans in Australia, in Canada, across the Commonwealth have have shown such respect to her that they've said they won't even push for a referendum anytime soon. And even within the Caribbean, where there is Republican sentiment, um, they've been very diplomatic and respectful in the way they've went about it. They've said they want to work with Charles. Charles, for his part, has certainly carried his mother's diplomacy, I believe. I mean, it's very early days, and if it could happen, but I think he has been exemplary so far. I mean, we're not seeing London just dictating its will on these small countries. We respect their right to choose their own destiny. I mean, look at what happened last year when Barbados declared itself a republic. Charles was in attendance, but it was all done respectfully. There was no animosity. It was all, it was, it was a significant moment. Barbados choosing its new destiny. I wish them all the best. But I didn't sense any real animosity there. True, Rihanna got a bigger cheer than Prince of Wales, but I don't think there was any great animosity. The one thing that perhaps went a bit unfortunate recently was William and Catherine's tour of the Caribbean. I think that was perhaps there was some bad optics involved in that, and it's a pity because they really are. I feel very exemplary royals. I think the optics of that tour are not who they are. I just think it was badly planned, to be honest, and I think some of the photographs didn't look good. It sort of showed them, for example, shaking hands with kid through a fence, and I'm sure at the time it was totally innocent, but unfortunately well, it looked like what it looked like. Um, anyway, I'm going to conclude this 15 minutes, not too long. But yeah, there's a few things. Firstly, when Pan Africans talk about reparations for slavery, and they keep pushing this, I wish they were a little bit more honest, for example, about African complicity in the slave trade. And while we're on it, if their issue is really about the moral wrongs and the evil of slavery, slavery today is a chronic problem, and some of the worst offenders are African countries. This isn't just whataboutery; it's just the reality. It's just the reality. So I don't know why there is such fixation on the transatlantic slave trade. It was certainly not the only slave trade in history. There was the Islamic slave trade across Africa. There was, of course, slavery in the Roman Empire. Serfdom existed in the Tsarist Empire up until the 1860s and beyond. Um, and then one of the least documented slave trades, the Barbary slave trade. This was actually when white Europeans were kidnapped by North African Barbary pirates and put into servitude. Slavery. This isn't to mention all the examples of slavery within Africa, such as what I've just quoted in the Kingdom of Dahomey. Now, this is barely documented. It's ignored. And I get the argument that just because slavery was abolished doesn't mean the legacy is gone. So poverty in the West Indies today is directly blamed on the legacy of slavery. But is it that simple? Because look at former colonies such as India. Look at how fast the Indian economy is growing. So if you could simply blame everything on slavery or on the British Empire, well, India was exploited. There wasn't slavery, but it was exploited. So how come the Indian economy is growing so fast? My point is, or to use another empire as an example, look at Vietnam. It was in the French Empire. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So it's too simple to say the legacy of colonialism keeps former colonies down because you have a situation where there's a discrepancy between those colonies, former colonies, I should say. Um, I'm not saying the wrongs of the British Empire should be ignored or glossed over, but I don't think they are. I mean, there is extensive coverage on this. There's films, there's books, there's lectures, and I'm very concerned about the direction our universities are going in because right now we have, in my opinion, far left academics who basically want to just demonize Western history, and the few voices that stand out are shunned or cancelled. Um, it's basically the British Empire was evil. That's it. And as British students, you must learn to be ashamed of this. I think that's a very dangerous narrative. I think it's much better to just give a balanced perspective. Yes, show the negative side. Talk about the exploitation. Talk about the transatlantic slave trade. Also talk about the Westminster system of government. Talk about the massive advances in technology, infrastructure, and a host of other things that came with the British Empire. Um, and if anyone has a chance to read it, I highly recommend this. Neil Ferguson Empire. Now, this is not absolutely self flagellating, but nor is it the apologia it's made out to be. What you're not going to see in this is a long diatribe about how evil the British were, as you often get with left wing academics and Pan Africanist writers. So it's not that, but it's, I feel, a very balanced account. Um, and he's one of the top historians around. So, anyway, I'll wrap this up, but those are some things to think about.